Right, so Michael Gove, a man I've compared to the children's public character Bob in the past, but who looks more and more like a melted candle with every passing day. He wants to tackle extremism, folks. Well, he could start with his own party, couldn't he? He should start with his own party, frankly, after 14 years of decimating public services, ruining lives, inflicting mass poverty on those with the least whilst enriching those with more than enough, introducing pernicious human rights abusing legislation from Rwanda flights to crackdowns on the right to protest. There's no shortage of options to choose from to justify adding the Conservative Party to a list of extremist organisations, in my view. Still, that's never going to be what Michael Gove is going to go for. And in fact, he's managed to unite people from across the political spectrum, left to right, against him because of his arbitrary, racist and highly selective choices for what he considers extremist, making a mockery of what he says he wants to do. However, if you really want to get to the bottom of extremism and deal with it meaningfully, the biggest spreaders of extreme views are those that platform it in our media, both in print and on screen, and none prove the necessity of that better than the BBC did last night on Question Time. Right, so Michael Gove, comedy gold on the dance floor, not so much in Parliament, has unveiled a list of organisations that he considers extremist, and it's annoyed just about everyone. You've got civil rights groups kicking off over it. You've got Muslim community groups kicking off over it. You've got the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation kicking off over it. You've even got Priti Patel kicking off over it. And she was the one who kicked off the Rwanda deportation business, after all. So it very much looks like a Colombian marching powder-induced piece of legislation, clearly not thought through with clear thought and sound mind at any rate. The reason they've all kicked off is because rather than measuring extremism by actions committed, Gove is instead changing to an ideology-based approach. In other words, what an organisation says it is about matters more than anything they actually do. Now, this is inherently problematic because you're going to ban people or organisations based on what you think they're thinking rather than actions they actually take. Potential criminality committed. It's Minority Report stuff again. Thought police. And functionally just clamps down on freedom of speech and freedom of expression again. Something we've become accustomed to the Tories doing, though. So who are the affected organisations now and going forward? Well, here's an excerpt from The Guardian, for once, just laying out the facts rather than spinning it in this little bit anyway. The government stated that impartial officials will be conducting a rigorous assessment in the next few weeks to determine who falls under the auspices of this new definition. Organisations that will be evaluated include the far-right groups British National Socialist Movement and Patriotic Alternative, as well as the Muslim Association of Britain, Muslim Engagement and Development, MEND, and CAGE. Names of other groups that have been leaked which are also allegedly under assessment are Friends of Al-Aqsa, Five Pillars, and Palestine Action. Okay, so neo-Nazi groups like Patriotic Alternative and the misleadingly named, not at all socialist, British National Socialist Movement belong on an extremist list. I don't have issue with that because their deeds match their words, for one. So under standard definition, they ought to be included in my view. But every other group being named now and being looked at going forwards is hugely racist and problematic because they're clearly targeting Muslim groups and therefore is demonstrably Islamophobic. Gove said in Parliament that Islamism is a totalitarian ideology which seeks to divide, calls for the establishment of an Islamic state governed by Sharia law, and seeks the overthrow of liberal democratic principles. And added, organisations such as the Muslim Association of Britain, which is the British affiliate of the Muslim Brotherhood, and other groups such as CAGE and MEND, give rise to concern for their Islamist orientation and view. If that isn't a blatantly racist statement, I don't know what is. And certainly those groups mentioned agree. The Muslim Association of Britain, or MAB, is an anti-war protest group. They opposed the Iraq War, often working together with the Stop the War Coalition and the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. They oppose what Israel is doing in Gaza now. They promote Muslim participation in British life, politics and more. Their motto is Muslims at their best. They are a member of the pan-European group, the Federation of Islamic Organisations in Europe, the FIOE. So is that entire pan-European group problematic and terrorist then? Gove accuses them of being affiliated to the Muslim Brotherhood, though. That needs to be proven because although some in MAB have admitted to having shared ideas rooted in Islam, the religion, not terrorism with that group. They've also flatly denied being anything other than an independent entity, not an affiliate in any way, shape or form to any other body. However, under Gove's new directive, just thinking along similar lines, even if rooted in Islamic faith, would appear to be enough to get labelled extremist. Muslim Engagement and Development, MEND, is a non-profit company, again seeking to build better engagement in Britain amongst Muslim communities, better representation in politics, in civil society, take their place in a modern Britain as a multicultural culture. They've issued a somewhat lengthy statement in response to Gove, and they've thrown down the gauntlet daring Gove to say what he said about them in Parliament outside of it. So it sounds like they'd quite like a day in court with him over this. Part of their statement reads, MEND CEO Azar Qayyum said, "We challenge Michael Gove to repeat his claims outside of Parliament and without the protection of parliamentary privilege if he believes he can provide the evidence to back up his view that MEND has called for the establishment of an Islamic state governed by Sharia law." Gove himself has a long track record of Islamophobic views and associations. He is a founding member of the Henry Jackson Society, which promoted an anti-Muslim agenda over many years and led the government's role in the Trojan Horse affair. This falsely accused a number of schools in Birmingham of an Islamist takeover on the back of a fake letter. Subsequent inquiries found no evidence of radicalisation in these schools. Given his own extremist credentials, for him to be lecturing others as to who is or is not an extremist is an example of rank hypocrisy, and there would appear to be a persuasive argument that he is also an extremist on his own definition. Certainly, MEND are not the only ones to say Gove ought to fall foul of his own criteria. Of the other groups mentioned, they are equally not extremist. Cage speak out against extremist legislation used to imprison people, mainly Muslims, under false pretences. They've been involved a lot in relation to Guantanamo Bay, for example, but here and now are regularly calling out Israel for its imprisonment of thousands of Palestinians. And Palestine Action are exactly what they say on the tin. They take action on behalf of Palestine. And this involves protest on their part, mainly from public demonstrations to direct action looking to shut down arms dealers to the Israeli regime. Quite a lot of us would agree with that right now. 5 Pillars is a Muslim-centred media outlet. So Gove, by potentially targeting them, is seeking to strip Muslims of a voice in the media, of a news outlet. And Friends of Al-Aqsa, named after the famous mosque, are again a pro-Palestine outfit advocating for, amongst other things, boycott, divestment and sanctions on Israel. Their website at this moment in time, this is terrorism for you folks, is running a big ad campaign on boycotting Israeli dates. That's really extremist, isn't it? Now, you might have twigged to the fact this is a very anti-Palestinian list of groups. I can't imagine why that is the case.
It's a pleasure to support the Board of Deputies, to support the Jewish Leadership Council. It's a pleasure to be on this stage, a pleasure to be a representative of Her Majesty's government, and to say to this audience that I'm proud to be a friend of Israel and proud to be a Zionist.
Oh, he's proud to be a Zionist then. Well, do you know what, Michael? Of all these groups, the one none of them has ever done is call for a sitting MP to be shot. You're taking money from somebody who should very much fall foul of any definition of extremism. And if the Tories had any intention of really dealing with extremism, they won't be making exceptions for rich donors and won't be making exceptions for Israel. And it's that brings me onto the BBC, because if we really want to tackle extremism, then they of all platforms, more than any, need to stop platforming it under the weak excuse of balance. Extremist views are not part of any balance. They're not any part of a balanced political conversation or discourse. And it happens week after week. And this week, they platformed yet again, as they have done repeatedly for many years now, Murdoch Times columnist Melanie Phillips. There is usually a journalistic representative of some sort on the panel. They invariably come from one of the right-wing papers, more often than not. The balance that the BBC always bleats about maintaining was out of the window, frankly, as you had ardent Zionist Phillips, a Tory MP, a Starmer MP, and a Starmer cheerleader in Aisha Hazarika, forming a right-wing rump versus Stephen Flynn of the SNP, who, it has to be said, more than held his own. But when it came to Gove's extremism nonsense, the audience, which is supposed to be skewed towards the Tories, balance, the reasoning on this one is so that the audience is reflective of parliamentary makeup, well, they overwhelmingly did not support this. But it was Phillips who proved how deranged she is, how appalling the BBC are for repeatedly platforming her, and she's certainly not the only one regularly platformed that shouldn't be. especially if we want to have a serious political discussion on important topics, but also because she might as well have been deployed to the BBC by Benjamin Netanyahu himself. She lives most of the time in Israel now, so okay, red flag right off the bat if she's going to be condemning Palestinians and extolling the non-existent virtues of Israel. But the line she took was so unhinged it would make the IDF blush. She was laughed at, and rightly so. The BBC should be mocked too for even having her on. What she said was dangerously misleading on multiple issues, because we know food isn't getting in. We've seen settlers cheering and partying as they block the aid trucks. There is 30,000 tons of aid queued up outside Gaza that can't get in. She also chose to lie about the infiltration of UNRWA, for which Israel has provided no evidence, which has led to various nations and organisations restoring their funding to the UN aid agency to continue their important work supporting the Palestinians, much to Israel's annoyance. But of course their lies are extremist. People are starving to death because of them. How can that not be extreme? And the BBC puts somebody on their panel that they know will repeat those extremist things. There are people out there who will believe them. There was one very loud idiot in the audience clapping, even as most of the audience laughed at Phillips. It only takes one individual to be radicalised to cause an incident. There are 2 dead MPs, as we keep getting reminded about, who were both murdered by individuals acting on their own. And it's not extreme to state that Melanie Phillips' words do carry that danger. And we know that because she was cited as one of the influences of the Norwegian mass murderer Anders Breivik. Why is it that she is still on our screens after that? She cited YouTube as her source of information for her evidence. But of course that can be just as selective. Nobody watches my channel, for example, for my right-wing views, because I don't have any. I don't pretend to either, but I do damn well take pride in my research and being honest in my belief in what I say, and she was not being that. And certainly not everyone on the platform necessarily does so either. But of course Israel are not deemed extremist. Zionism is not deemed extremist. Personally, I think that should be tested under the law right now, especially in light of what is being done in the name of Zionism in Gaza. Gove is bonkers and biased and belongs nowhere near power when he's so self-professedly loyal to an apartheid regime, to the point their blatant extremism is given a blind eye to, and our media are equally as unfit to present factual news on such issues when they literally platform extremist views to talk about extremism. People are not as stupid as politicians and the media take us for, when the propaganda videos are far outweighed by the very real actions being carried out and recorded and play out across social media in real time before our eyes, the impact on lives that is having. They should all be ashamed, and we need a far bigger, broader debate on extremism than we're getting. Sadly, it's no better coming from Labour right now either. That leadership arguably even more loyal to the Israeli regime than Gove is, which is likely why Keir Starmer's recent Ramadan message went down like a cup of cold sick amongst Muslim communities, and plenty had a thing or two to say to him on that, which you can find out all about here. I'll hopefully catch you on the next bid. Cheers, folks.